Virginians have always stood at the crossroads of the fight for freedom. It is a battle in which we all reap the benefits. After the close of World War II, Korea was divided at the 38th parallel, with a communist government supported by China and the Soviet Union to the north, and a democratic government supported by the Western Allies to the south. On June 25, 1950, less than 5 years later, the United States found itself again drawn into war. The Korean War, often called the Forgotten War, was the first military action conducted by the United Nations. 22 nations supported the UN resolution and moved to defend South Korea from an unprovoked invasion from the north. Spearheaded by U.S. forces in a country halfway around the world, the Korean War became a study in frustration, punctuated by weather extremes, geographic hardships, political influences, and fluctuating front lines. The result was 33,741 Americans killed in action, with the enemy being held at the 38th parallel by the signing of an armistice. Today, over 50 years later, the United States still monitors that border. After the first shot was fired, the invading North Korean forces pushed relentlessly south, squeezing the American and South Korean forces onto the Pusan Peninsula. This created the Pusan Perimeter, a 140-mile-long defensive position and scene of some of the war's fiercest fighting. On September 15, 1950, the Marines, led by General Douglas MacArthur, landed on the west coast of South Korea at Incheon Harbor. This masterful invasion led to the recapture of Seoul, the capital of South Korea. Meanwhile, to the south, the 8th Army, United Nations, and South Korean troops, led by General Walton H. Walker, broke out of the Pusan Perimeter, attacked northward, joining forces with MacArthur to push the North Korean People's Army out of South Korea and beyond.
In 1950, July, we got the word that North Korea had invaded South Korea. Papers came out, and we wasn't too much concerned because, it didn't sound like much. They called it police action.
The Korean attack on the 25th of June, 1950 was a big surprise, at least to me in the Army. And I think to our politicians as well.
By that time, in 1950, the UN had entered the picture. Of course, the UN called on all of the nations to provide forces. And the U.S., which at that time was at peace and we weren't prepared for, on a wartime footing, began to mobilize.
Honestly, I thought they'd done sent me to the end of the world. But it was, I don't know, you get a lot of fears and you wonder what you're getting into, or kind of changes your whole attitude about things. To me, as long as you're over there, you stayed scared because you never knew when they was going to, what was coming off or when you was going to get hit or what.
On the 4th of July morning, all the fireworks started. When we looked down the road, here comes some tanks. And we sit down and counted 37 tanks. They went on. Only thing we had was a 75. Try to knock out one. We never could knock out one. First day of battle, we lost 120 soldiers in my company. We had to have 120 replacements after the first day. When we got the word to get out of there, we just lucky we got out of there. It took us 4 days and 4 nights to get back to where the American troops were then. Sent 400 over there. And out of that 400, I understand, I think it was only about 16 of them 400 ever come out of there.
At night, in the middle of the night, the American tanks were on the road and the Korean tanks came down and they were confronted one right in front of the other. And evidently they had placed mines behind our tanks. When they backed up, it exploded, blew the track off. And you could hear the guys in the tank saying, "Point blank fire." And one round went right down the muzzle of the North Korean tank and just split it open. They was that close together. It went on about all night.
The Koreans, they would, especially during daylight hours, they'd pretend they was farmers. Once it got dark, or some of them didn't even wait till it get dark, by the time your back was turned, that's when they'd hit you. Well, they dressed just like the civilians did, and you couldn't tell the difference in them. You didn't know whether they was in him or not. I had a good buddy he was from Wisconsin. He got blowed up with a landmine. And, you know, that's hard to take, watching them boys like that. Because they were some good buddies.
We moved back to Pusan Perimeter, and we got there about midnight, and we was at an old schoolhouse building, and you could see the ocean behind us. You wasn't anywhere to go. No ships I did catch. So it was kind of a desperate time because you couldn't go anywhere. Wasn't any withdrawing from there. It was hard to get water. We had a little purifying pill that you're supposed to put in the water, let it stay a half hour before you drank it. And sometimes we'd get so desperate, we would take the pill and drink the water and let it purify in our stomach and fill our canteen back up again.
I couldn't understand why I was shaking, because it wasn't really that cold, but I was shaking like a leaf when I was in that ditch. And after a little while, I realized why I was shaking. It was because I was scared, not because I was cold.
It was a very difficult period in the initial days. Very heavy casualties during this time. We went from 800 men battalions to perhaps 300 men. When the 9th Infantry had gone into Korea, it had 2 white battalions and 1 black battalion, commanded by a white lieutenant colonel with a white major executive. All the other officers and men were African American. As a result of all the casualties, replacements came in, and our colonel decided this was ridiculous, and from then on there was no such thing as differentiation. White soldiers replaced black, black soldiers replaced white. The whole thing was forgotten. Didn't matter. There were soldiers and good ones.
General Walker formed the Pusan Perimeter. Pusan is down on the coast where the ships came in. The division commander, he gave to me a message. It said, "All men will hold the position they now occupy for the honor of the country and the division." We were holding on by our teeth. I lost many dear friends in that fight. I say I lost my whole platoon was destroyed. Everyone was fighting for their lives.
The first impression I got that I was in trouble was this sergeant, he says, they were only outnumbered 6-1. He says, well, that's about even. And right then I knew that I didn't really want to be here. So we spent about 4 weeks at the Pusan Perimeter. when all this was going on, we would be cut off for 2 or 3 days at a time. There'd be as much fighting in the rear as there would be in the front. We was at a place called Battle Mountain, and that changed hands 13 times in 14 days. When MacArthur was planning on invading Incheon, they pulled the Marines out, so we had to spread out even further, and sometimes that'd be 300 yards between units, between squads, because the line was so thin and we didn't have enough people. Nobody even thought about retreating after General Walker says, you know, this is as far as we go, boys, this would be no Dunkirk. We want to stay right here.
We landed in Incheon in September 1950. That was the one that MacArthur had to really fight to get, because all of the people, I think Joint Chiefs of Staff and all of them, they were against it, said it couldn't be done.
The Incheon landing was probably the smartest thing MacArthur ever did. I landed at Incheon, and I went in with the 7th Marines.
We landed, we had to wait till the evening when the tide was high. They have a 30-foot tide over there. And so we landed on LVTs, which is a landing vehicle track. But we went over to a seawall, and then we had to put ladders up and climb up over the seawall and then get up on land. There was a considerable amount of fighting because you could hear them bullets zinging, you know, and that put a little fear in you right then. And the next morning, looked out on the Incheon area, and there was no water. It was a big mud flat, and like ships, LST were just sitting on the mud out there. It was just, I mean, unreal.
Then we moved quickly because the fighting was quite severe in that area. They needed to take care of our patients, so we set up a hospital and a school, took over a school. And we shortly then thereafter were taking care of patients, not just the American patients, but all the UN patients.
We were at the high ground, then we headed towards Seoul. And then the third day, on the 18th, we came under like heavy mortar fire. We had a lot of guys. In fact, I got wounded that day. That was the day before my 19th birthday. We lost probably about 10 guys in just our platoon. Chesty Puller, who was our regimental commander, and he was there to greet me, and he gave me the Purple Heart. I mean, that's the type, he was a Marine, and he did stay in touch with the peons. At that time, he was a bird colonel. But yeah, he was a pretty good guy. And matter of fact, he lived in Saluda, Virginia.
We went in the left side, the 7th did, the edge of Seoul, and that was, we were supposed to cut off the retreat of the North Koreans going north.
We were really on the verge of being shoved out in the ocean. Incheon landing, that did the trick. See, the Incheon landing way up here, and they're going to go across and cut all these off down here, right through Seoul and that way. So when the enemy heard that, that's when they broke and ran back north. So he just chasing them. Then from then on, that's when they broke out of the Pusan Perimeter.
After the Incheon landing, the North Koreans, they were running so fast then about trying to get back to North Korea that where we were supposed to land in North Korea, the troops on the ground, they'd already passed where we were supposed to land, so we had to sit out there for several days. And finally, it took us back into port. For what reason? I guess for supplies or something. And So we'd set out there so long in the bay that I know every day for lunch they give us green pea soup and graham crackers. So to this day I hate green pea soup. I can't stand it.
And then we broke out of Pusan Perimeter. Everybody was on the attack after that. And we chased the North Koreans pretty good ways.
There's a big flat rock there, and Bob Davis and myself, we decided we'd spend the night up on that rock. It was nice and warm from the sun during the day. So we laid our sleeping bags out on that rock, and about 2 o'clock in the morning, we woke up, limbs coming off the trees, mortars coming in from every direction. So we came off of that rock, and we were trapped for 3 days right there. That was the first contact we had with the Chinese.
We were within 75 miles from the Manchurian border. The 8th Army was the 25th Division, the 2nd Division, the 1st Cav. Those units were moving over on the west side of the peninsula, and the Marines were moving over on the left side, on the right side. We were on the left side, moving forward. And we got, as I say, within about 75 miles of the Manchurian border, when all of a sudden, the rumors had been that there were a few Chinese volunteers had come in. Those few volunteers turned out to be 2 field armies of 400,000 Chinese troops. 400,000 Chinese troops. It was unbelievable, just unbelievable.
When the Chinese crossed the Yellow River in force, joining the North Koreans, it tilted the balance of power and set the stage for one of America's most challenging times on the battlefields of Korea.